Welcome to this podcast from Rolling Roads Baptist Church of Greensboro, North Carolina. You're invited to join with us as we are growing towards Christ. The following is a message from a recent Sunday morning worship service.
Our Bible study podcast for this week once again comes from Bible Studies for Life, and we're continuing on with the Encounters with Jesus series of lessons. And today's lesson is Jesus Opened My Eyes to the Truth. This is for the week of March 26th. And the photo at the beginning is one of those eye exam machines. I forgot what they call them, but you use them at the eye doctor when they're checking out your prescription, I guess, for your glasses and checking on your vision. And so the main point, as they write it here, is Jesus led me to increasingly see who he is, which you could word in normal English, Jesus helps me to see him better. So the passage is John chapter 9, and there are excerpts there from the long story about the man who was born blind. The writer begins to talk about something that I have to do soon for my son, where we go to the Division of Motor Vehicles office and think about driver's licensing. And he talks about how he had to do an eye test. And he did the first screen and the second screen just fine, but the third screen was broken. It looked more like a Rorschach test, which is the ink blots, I think. When I asked about the broken machine, she responded with a smirk and told me to read the line again. The machine was working just fine, but my eyes weren't. I needed glasses, and I had no idea. I'm not sure how long my eyesight had been suffering, but I'd obviously never noticed because I had gotten used to it. So the writer compares this physical difficulty seeing with spiritual blindness, which is indeed the main point in contrast between the man born blind and the Pharisees who criticized him and ultimately excommunicated him, even though he had been just healed by God. So, as we encounter Jesus, we know that he helps us to see him more clearly. John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. As he was passing by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," Jesus answered. "This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. We must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After he said these things, he spit on the ground, made some mud from the saliva, and spread the mud in the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he left and washed and came back seeing. So the pool of Siloam was built by Hezekiah to protect the city water supply. And then the writer begins to talk about how he has so much in front of him that he misses what is right around him. That's what his wife tells him. And he says sometimes it is easier to plan and schedule things weeks or months out than it is to find a few minutes to take care of something in the now. And then he points out this sort of busyness is not what Jesus did. Jesus was intentional, and Jesus paid attention. He knew where he was going, ultimately, of course, to the cross in the Gospel of John. He knew where he was going, and yet along the way, he had intentional encounters with people to change their lives. And so One day, as Jesus and his disciples are leaving the temple complex in John 8:59, they passed by a blind man. So there's a lot of people there, and a lot of hustle and bustle, and there's plenty of reason just to keep going and get out of there. But Jesus, though, sees the man anyway. Jesus sees everything. Jesus knows everything. God knows everything. And this is part of his plan for ministry on the earth. And remember that a lot of people in that day thought that if you had an infirmity or a handicap, or you were blind, for example, that it must mean that somebody was a sinner. And that's why they asked this question. Who sinned, this man or his parents? Trying to figure out maybe what's going on. And Jesus uses this as a teaching moment. And the disciples were living in their own culture with their own worldview, and they didn't see things maybe the way God did. And Jesus said, listen, his blindness is an occasion for the glory of God. And that's what really the point is. And that's the point of all of our challenges and our difficulties. That through them, we trust God through the difficulties. And thereby, God is honored and glorified as we continue to trust in him in spite of difficulties and challenges of life. And so the light of the world here, Jesus, as he says in verse 5, I am the light of the world. He's going to light up this man's eyes. He's going to heal him so that he can see. And he goes about explaining to the disciples about the work of God being displayed in this man's life. That is the truth of our difficulties and our challenges and our problems in life, so that God might display his work through us. So God's work is not magic. God's work is not just something at church. God's work is not something about just ritual and ceremony, even though that's part of it sometimes. God's work is in our hearts and in our lives and in our living for his glory on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Not just Sunday morning. So you don't put religion in a box, because Jesus was leaving the temple when all of this happened. He was in public. He was right out there where everybody else was. And so they skip around to some other verses. They go down to verse 32 and 33. Throughout history, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. So here's the idea of the Pharisees missing the point about what has gone on. Remember that the man blind from birth could now see, but the Pharisees were only concerned with what day of the week the miracle happened, or on which day of the week the miracle had happened, in proper grammar, and who this healer thought he was, or something like that. The religious experts were supposed to be able to see with spiritual eyes, but they were utterly blind. And he gives a funny illustration about missing the point about the Wright brothers. In December 1903, the Wright brothers were in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. You may have heard this story. But they were in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, testing their airplane. After many attempts, they were able to get the flyer off the ground. Breaking news. Obviously, they were extremely excited. But the Dayton, Ohio Daily News, where the Wright brothers were from, ran this headline: The Wright brothers are coming home. The Wright brothers are coming home. But I thought they just did man's first flight off of the ground in an airplane. that man could now fly. But the editor missed the point. Man achieved flight for the first time, and all the editors saw as being news was that the Wright brothers would be home in time for Christmas. Now, boy, that is really missing the point, isn't it? Sounds a lot like our world today and our news headlines today. Completely missing the point about the important things that are going on, and they keep us busy thinking about tragedies and horrible things, all the while making them worse and ignoring the very, very important things that are going on in the world today. So anyway, Jesus is still at work today, and then he talks about experiencing God and finding out where God is working and joining him in the work. So we can be like the Sunday school lesson writer, and we can pray daily, ask God daily to show us what he is doing around us. Ask God to help us avoid spiritual blindness like the Pharisees, and help us to be able to see what he is doing around us. And God will answer our prayer. When we are blessed to notice God on the move, he says on page 56, we don't need to stand around and argue about it. We just need to jump in and join God in his work, and that is definitely true. The formerly blind man said something to these leaders that was extremely profound, especially considering that he had not been around Jesus all that long. The man said, if this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. So the man born blind is sticking up for Jesus in verses 32 and 33. And he's telling the Pharisees that you need to open your eyes and realize the power of God that is at work in my life, that I once was blind and now I can see. He said not only that Jesus could not have done this miracle if God weren't with him, but Jesus couldn't have done anything. Now, this is the same truth that Jesus told his disciples earlier, remember? And later in John 15, he said the same thing, but he just said it. I don't know why he goes to that, but he says right here, verse 4, we must do the work of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no man can work. And then John 15, he says, the one who remains in me and I in him produces much fruit because you can do nothing without me. So we act and we live in the power of God. We must stay abiding with Jesus. Well, our last section of Scripture, before I completely lose my voice, is verses 35 through 38. Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, and when he found him, he asked him, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? He asked. Jesus said, you have seen him, and in fact, he is the one speaking with you. I believe, Lord, he said, and he worshiped him. So, the man was not really prepared for what Jesus was going to say to him, but the man had been thrown out or excommunicated. He was being hurt by the people who should have been helping him, the Pharisees, and he was being thrown out of their meeting. The writer says they excommunicated him, the writer of the lesson. But what does Jesus do? Jesus goes looking for him. I never thought of this before, but the Sunday school lesson points out that this is exactly what a good shepherd does. He goes and looks for his sheep. He goes out and finds them. And as one of our local pastors said in a podcast recently, he sought out meaningful contact with the person. So, Jesus, when he found him, asked him a very important question. And he talks about whether the man still has faith. Well, the man had faith when he was sticking up for him in front of the Pharisees. And Jesus found out that the man still had faith, but he wasn't sure who he was, and he was a little confused about the identity of Jesus. And to make it clear, Jesus says, the Son of Man, the Son of God, is the one who is speaking with you. And then the response of the man is, I believe in you, and he worshiped him. So here again, to make it clear, we have someone who needed more clarification about Jesus' identity. Jesus gives it to him very clearly, pointing out that I am the Son of God, the Son of Man, and I'm the one who healed you, and I am speaking to you now. Do you have faith? Do you still believe in me, even though you've been rejected by the Jews who should be happy that you were healed? And so the man says, yes, I believe. He verbalizes it, he speaks it, and he confesses it with his life, probably for the rest of his life. The man's faith culminated in both a declaration and worship. It is a declaration, an outward sign or public profession of faith, something we have come to believe. Paul says in Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Another way the man expressed his faith was through worship. Well, it's actually the same thing. So profession is part of worship. So there's a little confusion here in the lesson. But anyway, he continues to worship him. And that is the question. Do we desire to continue to worship Jesus because of the encounter we have had with him in our life? Has he met us and changed our life? Has he helped us to see what we could not see before? Has he helped us to see him more clearly? So, at the beginning of the story, at the beginning of our lesson today, we see the Pharisees think they can see, and yet through the story we find out that they are blind, and they reject the work of God. Night has come into their lives at that moment. And yet the man born blind, he's been blind for a pretty long time, maybe. Who knows? More than a day. And he is made to see by Jesus. And not only is his physical blindness removed, but he has a spiritual blindness removed as well. So the poor man, the man who may be an outcast in society, sees more and more clearly as time goes on. Yet those who think they can see become more and more blind as time goes on. And what is the difference? The difference is Jesus working in their life. It is God intervening in their life, finding them and working in their lives and transforming their lives. And so this man comes to faith and continues to have faith as he trusts in the work of God during the bright, beautiful day of Jesus' ministry on earth. And so Jesus' ministry continues today through the mission of the disciples in the church, through the work of the Holy Spirit in this world today, and he will help you to see him more clearly today. Do you need to see Jesus more clearly? Do you need to understand the work of God in the world more clearly? Do you need to be able to see where God is at work and then join him in that work? I challenge you today to open your eyes to Jesus. Don't remain in spiritual darkness. Well, I hope this podcast has been a blessing to you. And Lord willing, I will see you in person at church real soon at the Rolling Roads Baptist Church in Greensboro, North Carolina, near Four Seasons Mall and Smith High School. God bless you.
Thank you for listening. Rolling Roads Baptist Church is located at 2800 Van Story Street in Greensboro, North Carolina, near Four Seasons Town Center and Smith High School. You're invited to join with us this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. as we are growing towards Christ. Find us on Facebook and at rollingroads.org.